Can anyone smell bacon? The way you tell them, right?
Boom, boom.
Yes.
Boom, boom, indeed.
Boom,
Tracy.
boom, biddy, boom. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the digital download. As always, it's lovely to have you all here. This week, we're talking about mental health.
Wow.
So should we all go around and introduce ourselves, first of all? Rob.
Good morning. I'm Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results and a proud DLA partner.
And loving the beard.
No Shave November.
No Shave November. It looks magnificent.
Oh, I appreciate it. I hate it. It's all coming in white. Makes me look old.
And a touch of the Chris Christopherson about you.
Or
Distinguished.
the Santa.
Yes.
Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric from Crux up here in Aberdeen. Nice to be here, partnered with DLA Ignite.
Alex.
I'm Alex from Sapiro, founder of Sapiro and proud partner of DLA Ignite.
You see, we're saving the best till last. Tracy.
Or the latest until last. I'm Tracy Borison. I am just outside Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I am on the Crux team, proud partner of DLA Ignite.
See, we have to say that contractually that we're a proud partner of DLA, or Adam wouldn't let us on the show.
Yeah, I can just switch you off, can't I?
Yeah, you can. And you have done.
Many times. And Hazel.
Hello, I'm Dr Hazel Harrison. I'm a clinical psychologist and the founder of Think Avalana.
Fantastic. Well, it's lovely to have you here as a guest. So anybody that's tuned in will see that today we're talking about the psychology of mental health. So actually, do you want to give us a bit of background, Hazel, on how you got to be where you are today?
Sure. So in the UK, when you train as a clinical psychologist, you do that as part of a university and NHS kind of partnership. So I started my career really working in children and young people's mental health in NHS clinics, and I'm working with families as well. And I definitely got to a point where I felt like this was great and it was really part of what I cared deeply about, but also that I was realizing we're learning loads from the sort of science about how our brains work, about actually what we can do to take care of our mental health. But perhaps we weren't so great as clinical psychologists in sharing that in ways that were accessible and perhaps were reaching a slightly wider audience. So I decided that I would carry on working in the NHS, but I would also see if I could find people who'd be interested in listening to me talk about mental health and actually what we can do to take care of our mental health. So I started Think Avalana in 2015, really just on that big mission of actually how do we bring the science out so that people can use it, apply it, think about it for their own lives, for those around them. And that's really what I've been doing since then, which feels like quite a long time now.
And is there a major difference in the way that you now interface with people? I recently spoke to a doctor who was a GP who broke away from the GP because they thought that an 8-minute appointment where all they could really do was prescribe pills wasn't really getting to the root cause of issues. Are you now in a position where you're able to get really under the skin and back to root causes and deal with all that and spend the time that you want to spend with people?
I think there's definitely an element of freedom. And I think the challenge working in an NHS, clinic is obviously that particularly for clinical psychologists, we are pulled in to do the treatment and the firefighting and the things that we have to do. And actually it can be quite tricky to find the time, exactly as you're saying, to maybe do those preventative bits. So what I would say is that now that I can decide which projects I get involved in, I can very much perhaps steer that a bit more toward prevention, which is exactly as you're describing as perhaps where my interest lies, but also where I just feel like it's sensible for us to be putting some resource as well. Super.
Brilliant. So you're a very prolific poster and engager on LinkedIn. And as I said,
I gave you waves, I think it's fair to say.
but as I said to you earlier, it's really interesting looking at the stuff that you share and the stuff that you engage with and the stuff, of course, that you write and post. And scratching below the surface, what I have become aware of from reading your stuff is the incredible depth of ignorance that I have about mental health. And
I said it was never intended to make you feel like that.
You did, in fairness, and it's only because I'm quite a pragmatist, and I like to kind of understand things. And this is an incredibly complex environment, and unless I think you're suffering from some of these conditions, it makes it quite difficult to kind of empathize. but I was thinking that there are three kind of areas for me, and I suspect for everybody, where they have to be kind of cognizant of the challenges of kind of having healthy mental health or mental health. So life, me, am I happy? Do I know what happiness is? Am I fulfilled? Could things be better? Is it worth taking that risk? So there's that life bit about me. There's the work bit. Am I stressed? How do I handle the pressure at work? Because there will be pressure at work. Do I have a decent work-life balance? Am I just a machine, or do I have fun? And am I able to integrate those two? How do I deal with external factors? So things like the health of the cost of living crisis, recession, ecology, and green issues in terms of my behavior. And then as somebody that runs a company, there's this kind of how do I get the maximum from the people that I work with without becoming an Elon Musk type monster? How can I empower people, but not show off and demonstrate, I'm this brilliant and you can't be. Not that would be arrogant to say that, but you know what I mean. We're all good at some things, and to hold those up and go, that's what I expect of you, is often unreasonable for other people. So how does one set about balancing all of these things and spotting those areas where potentially we're heading towards a disaster? Because I think so often we see people kind of on the treadmill, often a treadmill that they've created for themselves, and there is no respite. Tomorrow things will be better, and actually they won't be better tomorrow. It has to get better today or start getting better. So how does one navigate this minefield?
Can I just interrupt?
Please.
It was the 7-minute mark. I had the over-under at 10. Knowing the topic that was coming in today, I was wondering when Elon Musk was going to be brought up. Sorry to add that.
Yeah, just repeat the question again, Adam.
If you could just wire me the 200 pound bet, I got 7 minutes on the sweep.
So I think, really, really good question, and obviously very complicated answer, but I'm going to try and think about how we can simplify it to the point that it's useful, because I think that's the other thing that I sort of care quite passionate about, is like, well, some of this, like you said, Adam, can start to feel quite complicated, and sometimes then perhaps it just feels like it's not useful anymore to anyone, because actually what we really need as humans are things that we can understand and grasp and apply as sort of easily as possible, particularly I think in this area. So I think one of the really important things that I would say, whether we're talking about our individual sense of well-being or mental health, or whether we're talking about how we support others, our employees or those around us, is that I think it really helps to be clear on what you as an individual, or you as a team or an organization, mean when you talk about mental health and well-being, and what it is that you need or know that you need. And that's quite complicated sometimes, because often we can be like, well, I don't know. Actually, humans are inevitably quite often make the decisions that we think are going to make us happy that turns out don't make us happy. And the science will say, why did you do that? Because we know from the science, this is the thing that's really going to make you happy. So it can be confusing. Our gut feeling perhaps isn't necessarily always right about our what will improve our well-being. But what I would say, I think from my own personal experiences, but also from digging into the research around this, is that it really helps to have a model. And it's interesting that some of the things that you're describing, Adam, I would say fit within a kind of well-being model that sits in my head all the time and becomes a kind of measure of how I'm doing. And I don't mean like how I'm doing in terms of how successful I am, but just in how I'm managing the things that you're describing, and how I'm keeping those in check. So that, you know, I have been very much committed to Marty Seligman's model of well-being, just because it really made sense in my own life. But I would say there are other models out there. Like, don't feel you have to
describe that. Describe Marty's view.
So his model has 5 main elements, and actually they sit with some of the things that you've been describing. So it's an acronym, so it's PERMA. So the first element is about positive emotion. I'm thinking about how we as humans need a balance of emotion in our day. And generally, it supports our mental health and well-being if some of those emotional experiences that we're having, not all of them, but some of them, feel what we might describe as being kind of pleasant, in terms of how we experience them. So that's things like joy, awe, love, hope, serenity. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to mean what we stereotypically imagine as happiness, but it is emotions that feel good to us. And we know that we experience all kinds of emotions in our day, and we need them all, and they exist for a really good reason, but we do need them in a balance. So the first thing that we're thinking about is like, okay, so how do we make sure, whether it's on an individual level or whether it's thinking about your employees or your team, how do we make sure that we get that balance in the day? You know, I'm just feel like I'm catching up on how you start these sessions, but apparently there's a joke, you know, which brings positivity.
What do you mean apparently?
It's
So
apparently funny.
Way you tell them, Eric.
Then there's E, which is stands for engagement, and that's about like how we apply our attention, where we are in our lives, whether our mind is able to be in this moment or whether we are going back into the past or projecting forward into the future. And actually, it's really good for us to have times in our day, not all the time, obviously, because we sometimes need moments where we can plan and predict and think about what we're going to do, and what's coming up. We also sometimes need time to reflect on what just happened, but we also need to be in this moment right now and have activities or experiences that pull us into being in this moment right now, that feel engaging. So we want to be here and we don't want to be kind of, you know, going sort of forward or backwards in terms of our perception of time. And then it's relationships. So we've got PER, relationships, biggest predictor of our mental health and well-being longer term. So our connections with each other, the degree to which we have people that we feel we can trust, that we can feel we can be open and honest with, who we feel will support us. We don't need loads of them. 1 is actually fine. Beyond 1 is great. But, you know, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you need loads of those people in your life. Actually, that becomes quite stressful sometimes too. You just need a few good people that, you know, you can call who will be there for you. And then M is about meaning. So that's about your sense of why you get out of bed in the morning and what gets you out of bed in the morning, and whether you feel that you are connected to a sense of purpose. And that doesn't have to be through your work. You know, we were talking about this, Adam, weren't we, before we started the call, about where your sense of purpose can come from. And some people perhaps find it in the work that they're doing, but some people don't. And it doesn't matter really, I don't think, where it sits, as long as there feels like there is a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and to belong to something, to feel that you are connected to something that's bigger than just yourself. And lastly, it's about having a sense of achievement and accomplishment, recognizing that we as humans like to feel that we've reached the end of the day and we've done something, whether that be a big thing or a small thing, that we've achieved something, that we're working towards something, or we're learning something. And that, in a nutshell, is some of the big sort of elements that we think make a difference to well-being. And like I said, there are other models and they kind of bring other bits and pieces in. But I found that one to be helpful in guiding me, but also it's quite like we've just done there. I mean, where are we up to? 10 minutes have I talked you through that? Maybe shorter than that. It's something that we can talk about. It's quite accessible, you know, and hopefully I've seen some of you nodding as I've been describing it. You know, it's easy to understand.
So
Oh.
you said about emotions being in balance,
Yeah.
and that being really important. And you said it at the beginning when you were describing that you need to have these moments of serenity and happiness and joy, and but not all those.
No.
And is that why typically, or not typically, often we see people that are massively successful that have got it all, so they've become billionaires or rock stars or hugely successful entrepreneurs or people that have got global adoration for what it is they do, and they've got everything, and then it all falls apart because what they've got is just those moments of joy, happiness, contentment, things, time, and they haven't got anything to challenge that, to put that in perspective.
I mean, it's a good question. I don't know exactly. Obviously, everyone's lives are different. I don't know why sometimes those things happen. But theoretically, if we talk about what it would feel like if we just experience positive emotion, I mean, if you imagine that, if I said, well, listen, you can all just feel positive emotions for the rest of your life. Who wants to sign up for that? Are you all in? Actually, after a while, when you start to go through that process and realize positive emotion isn't necessarily the thing that you want to tap into when you're moving through some grief, or when there's really difficult things happening in your life, or actually there are other emotions that we really need that point to the things that matter, that help us to understand our relationships with each other, but also, I guess, map to that aspect of meaning and purpose. And so, even I think Gallup did some research a while ago now, where they were asking people to think about how much stress they had in their lives, and then asking them to also link that to how happy they were. And interestingly, those people who have very low levels of stress also described very low levels of happiness. And it seemed like there was an aspect of we get stressed about the stuff that matters to us, and we have things in our life that matter to us that also bring us joy and happiness, so this is why it's about a balance. It's not just experiencing kind of one particular area of emotion, because it doesn't feel real either. Whenever I talk about this, from delivering a keynote, we're talking specifically about emotions and positive emotions, I say, I imagine that there's this threshold where if we just moved into kind of positive emotion, it'd be a bit like those early sort of Disney films where you're just sort of skipping through with like birds circling around and bursting into song every minute or two. And actually, that isn't real life. That isn't, but nor is that someone who, if you saw them, you'd be like, oh, I want to talk to them. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't feel like there's any authenticity there either. So some of the research that's been done around this area, Barbara Fredrickson particularly has been looking at what those ratios are, which I think is really interesting. It's very geeky, but if you really want to start to break it down, it's like, well, we kind of need more positive emotions than negative emotions in our day in order to create what feels like a balance to us, because the ones that are what we might describe as being negative tend to be more powerful. So we probably, to sort of maintain some level of equilibrium, we want to get something like 3-1. And then when you go upwards from there, you can create perhaps a bit more of an upward spiral, but don't go beyond 11-1, because then you're in Disney territory.
I think it's something that it really resonates with me, is the fact that, and I've seen this in pop culture, I've seen it with friends, family, and I see it very much in myself. I've got the positive experience, the positive emotions. I'm getting great engagement, and I'm giving great engagement. I've got solid relationships I can rely upon. I feel as if I've got meaning and a sense of belonging, and I'm achieving great things. However, that's all great and absolutely valid and wonderful. If you've had a history, if you've had a background, for me personally, I walked away from something when I was 19 that wasn't particularly nice. The day that I walked away, I put all of that in a box and I welded it shut. And it's kind of been in the life van, in the back of the van ever since. Occasionally, when you go over a little bump, the lid pops off. The lid pops off just a little bit, enough to just let some odor out to remind you. And even when perma's in perfect balance and going tremendously, there's just that little kind of like, oh yeah, which can, for me, I'm cool with it. I just process it and move on. Other people that I've seen, friends, family, who've got it all. Perma is working well. that little thing, that little lid that pops off from that history, that rucksack that they wear, that invisible rucksack they wear throughout their lives, opens up a little bit and just affects everything. So for me, there's a big bit about background history and the story up to today. The story
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Eric, because I mean, there's a whole nother part to what I'm interested in and what I studied, which is around kind of trauma and understanding trauma, you know, from the perspective of how it might influence our development and also how it changes what happens as we mature. And I think that, you know, then we start to perhaps move into a slightly different area about, yes, the impacts that our history has on us through our own experiences, and even now kind of epigenetic trauma, you know, how we actually may pass trauma on through generations, which I think is well, we're still just learning so much about. And so I present this model of well-being, not to say like, and that's going to fix everything, you know, but more to say, here are some things to think about in terms of how we take care of ourselves, you know, and maybe there's some kind of analogy that we might use that would fit within the kind of physical health sphere of being like, okay, so we know that, you know, we need to eat well and we need to exercise and we need to get enough sleep. And by the way, all of those things are really important for our well-being as well. You know, but doesn't necessarily take away from some kind of physical health problem that we may be grappling with, you know, but there are things that perhaps we can do that will support us with some of that. But it doesn't mean that that's not there. And I like that idea. I think we probably all have invisible backpacks and things that we're carrying around with us. Sometimes it can be very heavy and sometimes perhaps not as heavy. But that is, you know, that is part of being human too, isn't it? And actually how we learn to carry those things and what helps and supports us in that, and actually what gets in the way.
Yeah, big time.
So before we came on the call, Hazel and I were having a chat, and I said I've written this blog, but I haven't published it yet. And the blog is, again, from a pragmatist's view, is the fact that we hear about mental health challenges everywhere. And one of my concerns, I say concern, maybe it's not a concern, maybe it's just an annoyance to me, is where people use mental health as an excuse for not doing something. So, and the example that I gave to Hazel was somebody saying, "Oh, I suffer from social anxiety because when I go into a room with 100 people in and they all know each other and I don't know anybody, I get really nervous," which is a perfectly natural way to be. And the fact that often, you know, we deliberately seek high-powered, glamorous, high-paid jobs, and then we rail against the fact that with that comes a degree of stress and pressure, and people talk about burnout, and often, in my view, the choice is very straightforward. You know, if your job is too stressful, get a less stressful job. You know, the corollary to that is that you get less money and less glamour, but you get less stress as well. And whilst Hazel didn't slap me, she did say it's a little bit more complicated than that, because that is a very simplistic view of it. And I think that one of the challenges that we all have is that the concept of talking about mental health issues and challenges that people face in this space is a relatively new thing. You know, even a decade ago, nobody said, you know, I've had a breakdown, or I've got mental health issues, or I'm struggling with this. It just was never said in a public forum. So let's unpack that bit. Is that a good thing, first of all, Hazel, that this is now much more discussed? And
yeah.
Where do we position that line between, as you said earlier, you know, this is what the psychologists are doing, is working out where that line is between, it's perfectly normal for you not to want to go into that room, but equally some people are paralyzed, and where do we boundary that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would say it is good that we are talking about this so much more. And I think it is empowering, and it is normalizing, and it is giving people tools and resources and making people feel less alone in their mental health struggles. And I think there are lots of great things about the fact that this is now something that is becoming more normalized and is less shame inducing to talk about, because I think there was a lot of shame about having a mental health problem, and, you know, people feeling like they'd done something wrong, or that it was just them and they were kind of broken in some way. And now, you know, we understand perhaps more, to Eric's point, about some of the causes and difficulties that may contribute to mental health problems. And so what I said to you was, well, yes, it's not as simple as that. And also, I think my worry is it's easy for those of us who, so I feel anxious before I'm about to go on stage and deliver a big keynote to a large audience. I feel like I might be sick. I feel a bit like, why am I doing this? You know, I have all of these kind of reactions that we could say are kind of very, very normal reactions. And then I have a toolkit of things that I will do to try and help myself get through that process so I can go out on stage and do what I need to do. And I think when you have that toolkit, or when you've had these kinds of experiences, it's very easy to go, well, why don't they just do that? You know, like, why don't they just pull themselves together and go out on stage and do what they need to do? But of course, what we don't know, and I'm going to go back to Eric's beautiful metaphor, is what they're carrying around in their invisible rucksack. We don't know what it feels like to be in their skin, feeling the things that they are feeling, and what they are grappling with. And so I think, I suppose my sense is that we have to be really cautious in judging other people for how they do or don't manage in those types of situations. But whilst also recognizing that, yes, some of these emotions that we're describing, or some of these experiences that we're describing, we will all have at some point or another. You know, we may all have days where we feel very anxious. We may have days where we feel very low. And what the psychologists and psychiatrists and researchers and all of those practitioners in mental health are trying to understand is, at what point do we say, actually, that cluster of experiences for that period of time impacting on that much functionality, we're now going to call social anxiety or depression or obsessive compulsive disorder, or, you know, a massive endless list of things that we have clustered together. And it's important that we do put these into a context of understanding what they look like, because then we also can start to research what helps these people who are experiencing these types of difficulties get better as quickly as possible, or learn how to manage these symptoms in a way that is not so impactful and detrimental to the way that they want to live their life. You know, we do have to do this in order to think about the treatments and the interventions and the resources that can be offered to people to support them. But it is a line, and I think, you know, as we know, these the sort of DSM and the ICD-10 and 11 now, I think we're on 2, or maybe even 12, I've lost track. These are the books that tell us what these classifications are. You know, they get updated, so that, because we are updating our understanding of mental health, and we are kind of learning that there are perhaps differences or nuances or different ways of understanding these things that we hadn't before. So I suppose, in answer to your question, I think it's, you know, it is difficult, and it is sometimes easy to look on at other people and think, well, why don't they? That's just being human. Why don't they just kind of pull their socks up and get on with it? And I think perhaps that's not necessarily a very helpful perspective, because I think we don't know what else is going on.
How related is, you know, when I think about burnout, so I had an experience last year where it sort of crept up on me. How related is burnout to mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are going to be lots of different crossovers in terms of how we understand burnout, and whether it becomes something that, you know, it meets a diagnostic criteria, or crosses over into other areas of mental health or not. And of course, it can take on different routes too. because for some people it can perhaps lead into experiences of anxiety. For other people, perhaps more an experience of depression or experiences of stress. When we talk about stress, are we talking about burnout? Are we talking about burnout when we talk about stress? And I think they're we're getting better at defining those things too. And obviously burnout has some key elements that we use when we describe what that is, including that kind of just that loss of feeling that you have any control over things and you can, change how things are panning out.
Yeah. In my case, it was more the energy and the depletion of energy over a period of time, to the point where, I would normally manage stress by ensuring I was exercising and eating well, whilst keeping the work, the number of hours I worked in a week still pretty high. But it got to the point where no matter what exercise I did or how well I ate, cut out alcohol, that helped. I'd jump on, I remember jumping on the bike to kind of, wash the tiredness away, and I was just exhausted. I couldn't turn the pedals.
No.
And it was someone that said to me, you could be burnt out. I was like, no, I'm not burnt out. That's good. I'll know if I'm burnt out.
Yeah.
It's so odd that and I see lots of people falling into this cycle. They're on 99 all the time, and they think, right, what I need to do now is work myself out into an absolute frenzy, and that'll no concept of. I said to one of my friends the other day, what are you doing? Well, I'm working out a lot to try and get rid of some of the stress. So you're stressing yourself more to be less stressed. Yes, clearly you need exercise, but what about meditation? What about breathing?
Yeah.
What about just emptying your mind? I've got no time for that.
So that's a really good point. So Alex said about this creeping up on him. If you are eating unhealthily and you're not getting any exercise and you're getting fatter and fatter and fatter, you've got a very visual thing that what you're doing is not healthy for you.
Not always. Lots of people that eat unhealthily are skinny.
Yeah, but I was using that as a particular example. So often that there will be a physical manifestation of this. So what things can you do from a mental health, further to Ross's point? What mental exercises can you do, or what framework can you place around, or habits can you start to develop that keep you grounded and help you manage the stress of daily life, or help you identify the things that are warning signs?
So, I think I could probably answer that question for 2 days, just talking nonstop, and still not have even scratched the surface of all the things that we could or couldn't do that may or may not help us. Which is why I say sometimes it's really good to just have a model and kind of go back to that, so that you don't feel overwhelmed with all the possible things that you could and couldn't do, and actually stress yourself out that you're not managing to do all the things that you could do that might support your mental health, because you can get caught in a trap of that too, right? So one of the reasons why I like having a wellbeing model or something to kind of pin some of these things to is exactly for the reason that then we can start to think about what are the things that are supportive to us. And just like we've been speaking about before, we have a lot of individual difference. Some people find meditation to be really supportive of their mental health. Other people find it's actually not. And likewise with exercise, some people find that, if I don't run for like a couple of days, I just start getting really grumpy and irritable. And actually it's just something that really supports my kind of overall mood and well-being. But I know lots of people who hate running and it makes them miserable to do it. So, we have to find the things that fit and work for us. Having said that, what I suppose I'm interested in is what works for most of the people most of the time. So I'm going to talk about some of those things now, and things that hopefully we can engage in without causing ourselves more potential problems. I don't want to do any more harm. We definitely want to shift towards good places. So if we go back to that model of PERMA, then we can start to think about, well, how do we invest in some of those areas? And are we making sure that we invest in some of those areas to take care of ourselves? So Positive emotion is a really interesting one because unfortunately there are various emotions that when we try and make ourselves feel them, it often backfires. so if I said to you all, right, well, we've got the next 2 minutes just like you to make yourself feel as happy as possible. Do you know what I mean? Like actually, it's quite hard sometimes to just generate joy from nowhere. But what we have found from the research is that you can focus on some positive emotions and they tend to make them grow a bit more. So one that's getting lots of good press is maybe quite topical in terms of where we are in the season too, is gratitude and giving thanks. Actually recognizing the things that are working well in your life and trying to pay attention to those. We do have this negativity bias in our brain, which means we're much more likely to notice the things that aren't working well. Sometimes we have to actively bring our mind over to the things that we perhaps will just let slide by, but that it might be worth just noting so that we can feel that we've got a bit more of that balance again. And I know it sounds quite simple and you might be like, oh great, yeah, Dr. Hazel's telling us all just to be sort of grateful, but actually there's mountains of research that sits behind this now that I've found really fascinating about how it can lower our levels of stress, make us more likely to feel connected to other people, experience more positive emotion in our day. In its simplest form, it's like just finding a time. Sometimes it helps to twin it with an activity that you already do. So if you're someone that starts your day with a cup of tea or coffee, or maybe you're cleaning your teeth, you've got 2 minutes, just while you're doing that, just start to notice the things that are going well, recognize what they are, allow your mind to just focus on those a little bit. What we also know about how our brains function is that the more we give attention to a particular activity, the more our brain likes to go, oh, I know how to do this. I've done this before. I'm getting more and more efficient at this. So whilst it might be quite tricky to begin with, over time, what some people find, not everyone, but what some people find is that their brain kind of likes to do it at times that isn't your designated, gratitude time, because it's just got better at noticing the things that are working well. So we could go through, all the other areas of PERMA, and there are things like that sit behind those. And if people who are listening today are interested in finding out what some of those things are, there's a whole world of research and activities out there. Some of the organizations that I really like that I'd probably steer people towards, in the UK, we have Action for Happiness, which is very evidence-based. And they have great keynote speakers that you can watch on YouTube, but they also have a calendar each month with little activities that just little nudges each day. You can download it into I discovered this recently, you can let it sit in your calendar. And so it'll just have a little pop-up each day with a sort of cue or, an idea to just try. And most of them are grounded in kind of positive psychology interventions or mindfulness-based interventions, or things that we know might support our mental health and well-being. But also, if we're looking more kind of globally, there's things like the Centre for the Greater Good, which is linked to Berkeley University, and they have some really great resources over there as well. So yeah, I think there are lots of different things, and what I would say is, don't overwhelm yourself with trying lots of different ones, but pick something that feels like, yeah, maybe I'll give that a go for a week or two and just see whether it feels like it fits with me and my lifestyle and what works.
What helped you, Alex?
What, the last year?
Yeah.
Just slowed right down.
Yeah.
Started to clear my calendar. And try and rest as much as possible until I felt my energy coming back. And then it was actually, so I have a coach, someone that I used to have a weekly call with, and was actually jumping on my coaching call with her whilst getting on the bike because I was so busy. And she said, what are you doing? You sound exhausted. Well, I'm on the treadmill and this is how I'm feeling. And she was the one that said to me, it sounds like you burnt out. I'd get off that if I was you.
You're on the treadmill metaphorically and physically.
Yeah. But now the thing is, I still, your example of running at 99%, and maybe it's because I'm running my own business, I feel like I'm a little bit trapped, but I'm running at 99% all of the time.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm ill or I'm not feeling 100%, you know, the amount of output is dropping, but I'm still at 99%, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, small business
Can we-
owners often feel there's only 28 hours in a day and I'm working all of them.
Well,
Yeah.
I think I would love to talk about this from the mental health perspective, because I think as a society, we celebrate filling your day with things, right? So even as an entrepreneur, even if you were going to say, I'm going to work 8 hours a day, which, let's be honest, most people don't anymore. We're just like doing things constantly, right? And it's like, I often think about humans going into corporate working environments and being treated like batteries, right? We're just going to suck the energy out of you all day, but there's no charging station, right? So we're just going to suck the batteries out of you and then send you home and hope you don't.
Hey, but you get pizza on Friday. Pizza Friday.
And so, like, I find these conversations are really empowering, and being able to break down what I think are some of those societal narratives about like, this is what we should celebrate as a human race. Like, we should tell all of the entrepreneurs that they are supposed to work all of the time if they want their business to be successful. And like, I just don't believe that that's true. I believe that there's so many things that everybody does that doesn't contribute positively to mental health, doesn't contribute positively to business growth, just doesn't contribute. And we're so obsessed with doing things that we forget that sometimes the most power comes from, like Alex said, taking a break and stepping back and giving ourselves space to just explore some of these things. Because I also don't think you learn anything about what makes you stressed or what makes you happy or any of those things if we don't create space to explore that.
It took me 49 years to realize that if I don't do the little routine that I've got a daily routine that happens from the morning and, sporadically through the day and then into the evening. If I don't do that, I'm less effective at work. And it took me all that time to realize that being at 99 and just motoring on all the time, actually, unless I start every day with a cold shower. I do it every day. I've done it over 2 years. It increases my dopamine, reduces my cortisol. It gives me a brilliant start to the day. Another little thing that I do, I'll share it with you. You're going to laugh here, right? You're going to laugh at this.
We will now.
Yeah, you will. And I want you to, because it's funny. Before I have the cold shower, my wife Sarah knows to just leave the room because I like making the bed. I like to make the bed. And I saw that, and I'm not claiming it as a thing. I saw it in a YouTube clip by an admiral of the US fleet saying, every morning get up and make your bed and make it brilliant. Do it really well. Spend a lot of time getting it right. Number one, you've achieved something lovely first thing in the day. It's a thing that you do every day and you take pride in it and you get it done. Then I go and have a cold shower. 2 or 3 times a day. I only discovered this last year. I do box breathing. Box breathing. I absolutely love it. I did something quite stressful at the weekend. And 2 minutes before I went and did it, I did about 1.5 minutes of box breathing. And I'm a different person after I've used box breathing techniques. It changes everything for me. Now, maybe the idea of the thought that it changes everything for me, and I think that I know it's going to change everything for me, helps with that. But if I'm about to do a big presentation or do something, I'll do 30 seconds, 45 seconds of box breathing, and that works for me. I now know I need to walk. I need to walk in the woods every day for half an hour, 45 minutes. If I don't do these things, I'm less effective at work. And that would have made no sense to me 5 years ago.
But you're now, I think you're 49 still, are you? But you're old enough. You're old enough now to tell yourself it's okay to do that. I think for years I was in a corporate world, and I think many people do.
Me too.
You're not sure if it's okay to take the break or create some thinking time.
Where are you going, Alex? I'm just going to go and breathe for half an hour in a dark room. Yeah, whatever.
Well, and I think this is something really interesting to me, because I think there are people who care about these things and create spaces for them in the corporate work environment. Because when I worked in corporate and I adopted a sales team, and one of the sales team members had extreme anxiety. And so my perspective was like, if you're showing up from a state of anxiousness, that's not very productive for driving sales. So how can we create a space for you to, one, explore what's making you anxious, but two, to decompress when you're doing that? Because this guy used to just like peace out and not tell anyone where he was going, and no one would know where he was for like hours. And I'm like, I don't feel like that's safe for you. I don't feel like that's good for the company. So can we talk about this? And we had a one-on-one coaching call every week to just talk about the things that were making him anxious. And some of the things were the KPIs from the business. And so it gave us really interesting insight into like, how might we be able to change how we're requiring these salespeople to show up, give them more autonomy, because at the end of the day, we want them to sell things, right? If we're handcuffing them too hard, then they don't do that. And so I think there's just, I've probably said this on the show before because I feel like I say it all the time, but there's just like this level of ego in the corporate work environment I feel like we have to let go of, to say like, let's give these people some space to be people. And if we do that, like Eric was more productive, right? So what if we have a whole bunch of team members that are more productive?
Definitely. And I think, I think it's a really great point, Tracy. And I'm so pleased that you brought it up about that aspect of, busyness and this sense that we're being successful humans when we're always doing stuff, and that actually it can induce feelings of slight guilt if we, people ask us how we are and we're not very busy. Do you know what I mean? Like somehow we've got to be busy and we've got to be shown to be busy. And our calendars have got to be jammed full of things. And actually this week on LinkedIn, I've been sharing a few posts in relation to time. I'm not really sure why, but I think perhaps because I've been having these sorts of conversations with people about perception of time and how we use our time and how we measure our degree of feeling like we're successful. Actually, what is it that when we think about our days and they lead into our years, actually, what is it that we're using as a measure of success? And is it the things that we want to be priorities in our life? And for some people, that is going to be generating a certain level of income, and ensuring that they're hitting that. And for other people, it will be other things. But I think it is very useful to make the time to reflect on that wherever you are in your career path, to decide what are ultimately the things that you're going to feel are a priority to you, and to not let those slip down the ladder and think that you'll come back to them later on, because time doesn't allow us to do that. We can't neglect forming close relationships with others or giving time to our family, or we don't get to go back to that later, really, in the same way that things will move on, life will move on, and actually we have these moments now to decide what the things are that are really important to us. And I think not defining ourselves by our work is a really a necessary aspect of that. And yet perhaps for those of us that are running our own businesses or working as entrepreneurs or leading successful companies, it can very quickly fall into the trap of thinking that's who I am and that's how I define myself, and forgetting that we have all of these other ways that we can understand ourselves as well. So I think one of the ways that I think we have to push back against that is being more brave in actually sharing, as people have done on this call today, and it's been so lovely, how we find that balance, and actually that it is okay to take 30 minutes and to go and breathe in a dark room if that's what supports your mental health, and that will make you more productive, maybe, but maybe it doesn't matter whether it makes you more productive or not, because maybe it isn't about just generating and being productive. There are other things that bring meaning to our life, and I know that was quite a deep topic probably for a Friday, but what I would say, it is something that's worth reflecting on. Because having worked in pediatric oncology, in palliative care, in places where you see how life pans out, and you have conversations with people whose lives are coming to an end, wherever they may be in their, in the kind of years that they've lived, you do have this sense of understanding that we're very clear at the end of our life the things that matters, but we don't want to get there, thinking, oh crikey, I got all of this wrong. So sorry, a very heavy topic, but also I think just one that's worth, it is worth giving a bit of time to.
So
I think
Dr.
an interesting
Hazel,
thing. Sorry,
go ahead, Adam.
No, go, Rob.
So I was just going to ask, so if I think I've broken my arm or sprained my ankle, I go to an orthopedist, very reactionary. But when I don't have that type of injury, I have no need for an orthopedist. Whereas I go to see my dermatologist regularly, I go to see my general practitioner for an annual physical, very preventative. Believe most of mental health these days is very reactionary. Is there something that we can do as individuals to make it more proactive?
I think that's a great question, and I feel like we're moving towards that space, but I'm still not quite sure if we've got it right. There are some amazing apps out there, for example, now that will encourage you to kind of take a measure of your mental health and well-being. And if you were to commit your time to looking at those on a regular basis, you'd probably start to see, like we might be thinking about, and Alex has been, so sort of open and honest about his experiences last year. Were he being asked some of these questions about how he was doing, would we have noticed that things were maybe, dipping and changing? And perhaps we would have done. Perhaps we wouldn't have been asked the right questions to pick them up. So I think there is an importance of perhaps starting to take a bit of a measure of our well-being as a way to start to understand how things are changing for us. But what I don't know if we've done is found a good way to do that doesn't feel too cumbersome or just puts us off really quickly so that we decide we're not doing this anymore. How Mental is a organization in the UK who have just built an app called How Are We? And it's a very simple slider that you just move up and down on a line, and it will just store your results each time you input that, so that you can stand back and have a look and go, oh, how am I, and see how that might be kind of changing. But I'm imagining, Rob, that we're still going to see more possible ways of starting to really be able to kind of have these, mental health checkups, well-being checkups, if you like, that are going to work for us all. And that's the bit I don't think we've quite found yet, is like, actually, what does that look like? Some people work in organizations where they will offer something like that. But perhaps there's probably still a bit more work to do, I think, in that area. Peggy Kern, who works over in Australia, has been developing a few sort of questionnaires around PERMA, particularly, so the things that we're talking about today, so that you could take a kind of a questionnaire test, and it would look at, okay, how is your levels of positive emotion, Rob? How are you doing in terms of engagement? And you might start to see that perhaps there are some areas that you want to focus on a little bit more. But it doesn't seem to be quite the same, does it, as kind of someone being sent for a physical each year, or
right.
And I don't quite know. And there may be people listening, or there may be people out there that would say, oh, no, we're doing that really well. But I'm not sure where we've got to with that yet. I know Unmind, who's a big app company that I've been working for, they've been developing some really great tools for their app, which is sold to businesses. So people like John Lewis and British Airways and big organizations buy it, and then they give it to their employees so that they can have access to tools, but also ways of measuring their mental health. So we're definitely moving somewhere along that line in terms of making that a bit more accessible. But I'm not sure I don't know. I think we've probably got a bit more work to do.
There are tools and there are coaches, but honestly, one of the biggest concerns there is privacy and efficacy and authenticity. Anyone can call themselves a coach these days, and there are some that have gone through certifications that absolutely make it viable, and others who just I got laid off, and let me slap coach on there, and I'll give you whatever advice keeps the check coming from you every week. So
Yeah.
it's scary to put your trust into some of these things. So
yes, definitely. And I would say that that is a really important point, Rob, and one that I feel like over the last couple of years, you know, there's that balance of me being really excited that we're all talking about mental health and well-being a lot more, coupled with like, who are these people on Instagram that are telling us how to do X, Y, and Z, and what qualifications do they have? And are they informed enough to know what some of the dangers might be of sharing this technique or these ideas? Or so I definitely think there is a good, you know, it is sensible to be cautious around some of this and to kind of just check out where is this coming from and what credentials sit, you know, behind the person who's sharing some of these ideas. And I'm sure, like the American Psychological Association that you have over there, or the British Psychological Society, or the other organizations where you can actually go on and check out people's credentials and make sure that they're registered and are able to provide the services that you may well be needing if you're going down that route of finding someone, you know, to work with in that way.
I think Tracy has a question.
I do have a question, and I also just wanted to share something really quickly that works for me in that arena and just kind of measuring my mental health, is how many people in my circle that I interact with often am I confident enough to tell them how I'm really feeling. So like when they ask me, how are you? How many of the people do I interact with on a daily basis am I going to say, yeah, I'm fine, even if I'm not fine, versus like, you know what, I'm totally not fine. And I will be fine, but I'm not fine right now.
I think I'm in that circle because most times when I speak to you, I say, how you doing? You go, ah, shut up.
No, but interestingly, there was this comment from Andrew earlier where he says about he's been going to a weekly men's mental health group called Changing Rooms.
Brilliant.
And I think that that's really interesting because the current kind of working from home, much more isolationist view of how we run our lives means that we don't have 2 evenings a week in the pub chatting to people and potentially bonding with them and pouring our heart out to them. So it is potentially a much more lonely journey to be on now, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. There are two things I want to say about that. First of all, you've reminded me of Talk Club, which is another organization in the UK that was specifically for men and mental health. And one of the things that they have, Tracy, in there that I really love is that they start their sessions by saying, how are you out of 10? And I think when you're asked that question instead of how are you, it makes you think, yeah, actually on my scale of when I'm at my best and when I'm at my worst, how am I doing? And perhaps for those people who, you know, you do feel close and can trust, it enables you to answer that question in a way where you know, I'm at a 5, I'm at a 4, I'm at a 2 today, you know, and actually it's a really nice way of not necessarily having to find the complicated language for describing where you're at and why, but actually just to recognize that we are all on a scale. We will move up and down. That is very normal. And that it's sometimes helpful to share with other people where we are on that scale, particularly if we may need a bit more support. So how are you out of 10, I think, is a really nice addition to how are you. But also one of the research studies that's just come out of Harvard that I found really fascinating was about what they call relational diversity. So as you quite rightly say, Adam, lots of us are working from home now. The way that we interact and the people that we interact with may be quite different. And I notice this myself. Some days I will not have any scheduled calls. So I will be writing on my computer or working on content, developing a keynote, and I will only interact with my 2 children, one of whom is like a teenager and one's nearly going to be a teenager, you know, and mainly they interact with me like this. You know? So you suddenly realize, actually, my relational diversity, the amount of people that I have interact with in my day is quite small some days. And what the research would say is that a greater spectrum of relational diversity is actually more supportive of our well-being. So whilst we might imagine it's fine, I've had really good conversations with, you know, my partner or my family or my best friend, and then I've just been working, so I've had a good connection. We might imagine that that's enough, but actually what the research showed was that those people who interact with a stranger in their day, interact with a colleague, interact with their family, interact with one of their friends, not necessarily for long periods of time, but just had this kind of diversity in their sort of relationship portfolio, tended to have higher levels of well-being. Now, I know there are all sorts of reasons why that may be, and there are, you know, we can talk about those, but I think just knowing that for me made me think you should leave your office. Like, go to the library, have a chat with a librarian, go and get a coffee, you know, go and have a chat with the person who serves you coffee. Try and make sure that you interact with a few more people, because actually, as we go back to talking about the predictors of well-being long-term, our relationships are, you know, one of the biggest.
Adam,
Brilliant.
Adam, could you go into the chat and scroll down to the comment from Martin Thompson in between two comments from Laura Toop? Martin Thompson, come in a paired link.
Yes.
Martin, we saw your comment. We see you, absolutely. I'm connected to you, so I'll certainly reach out with you. We're hoping you're getting some help with all of this. If you're not, you heard some great resources and advice from Dr. Hazel. And I'm sure if you missed any of them or didn't have a pen handy, I'm sure Dr. Hazel wouldn't mind you touching base just for a reminder of what you can be doing. And I don't know if you are getting the help, but Andrew, you're in the same region as Andrew, and he seems to be getting some great advice from changing rooms. Maybe that's something that could help. And we hope you're getting all the help that you need.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for that, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And thank you to everybody on the panel, and thank you to everybody
thank you so
the
much,
audience.
Dr.
And you said about practicing gratitude, which I love that as an idea. So thank you, Dr. Hazel Harrison. What a fantastic way for us to spend an hour on a Friday.
Outstanding. Can we do another hour?
Yeah, everybody reach out to Hazel and connect with her on LinkedIn, because her content is outstanding, and she is, as you saw today, lovely. So thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you, everyone, for taking time.